it's something that's not an easy answer, and I don't know if I would ever have the right answer for that. From a engineering standpoint, it's all math, right? What other information do you want? Growing up in in trailer houses or apartments at that age, I don't ever remember that as being like, oh, I'm underprivileged. It was just that's where we all lived. But I never missed out on meals, and for the most part never missed out on doing things like extracurricular activities at school. I suppose if I would have been in high school in that same situation, then it probably would have been a little different. I think my kids are
absolutely in the top 1%. But within the United States, I would consider myself part of the wealthy 3%er. If I wasn't as rich as I was, my life would be probably a lot more focused on trying to find a career. I think being able to not really worry about money and have all my payments covered for me, like my car insurance, my phone bill, my food, all these things are covered for me, and so I don't have to pay that with my own money. And there's a lot of people, especially people living in inner cities, especially minorities, who simply don't have the opportunities. Homeless people, for example, I don't think are able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, so to speak.
There's an expectation, if you want to live in this country, that you should be willing to go out and get a job. That just because you get a paycheck for $900 doesn't mean that weekend you're going to make it rain money, and then on Monday you got to figure out how you're going to buy gas to go to work for the following week, right? And I think that's where a lot of those people that don't fall into the other categories but are still somehow homeless. It's like, so why is it so tough for you to find a job?
Having a high school diploma just doesn't make you a lot of money, and unfortunately, with the way that the economy has been going, wages have been stagnating for a long time, and it's becoming more and more difficult to find a reliable job.
I remember working for my grandfather. He would pay me $20 a day and we were doing between 10 to 12 hour days, 6 days a week.
I realized that I have it pretty good, and I absolutely did luck out with the family I was born into.
Growing up in Carson City in a small town like that, for the most part, if you had a house, you were part of the haves. So I suspect there's a lot of people that were living in nice houses like in our same neighborhood, but their kids were going without on a lot of other things like normal meals or being able to go do things.
Do you see somebody on the side of the road, they're unkempt, right? They're begging for money. They have the crazy look about them, and people just drive right on by. I do it. Guilty of it. You never really think of what they're going through. The first time my parents got divorced, my mom hurt her back. She was working in a nursing home, and she was on disability, and we would get food stamps. We didn't have a lot of food, for sure. We actually were part of those, when you donate food to churches for food drives, we were part of that for a long time. So they never had any savings. They liked to gamble. We lived in Nevada. Mm-hmm. We would actually, my brother and I we would call the casino. She used to like to go to the Lucky Strike, and Cactus Jacks. And we would call and have her paged so much that there was a few casinos that she went to that they knew her, and they're like, she's not here. So I was like, well, where is she then? Mm-hmm. So she would come home. She, I don't remember her fixing us dinner. She never graduated from high school. She dropped out when she was 15. She was pregnant with my older brother, Ed.
My father was one of the real interesting folks in my life. With, I think, an 8th grade education, the teacher told him, I think he'd finished the 8th grade, and she said, he lived down in Kentucky, and the teacher came to him and said, I've taught you everything I know, and no sense you coming back. So my father would go out with the sales or the newspaper boys, and at about 16, he was kind of a mentor for them, and he would sell these insurance policies. So he did this, and for a couple of weeks, he went back and he told them, I've really done a good job. And they said, you have done a good job. And the boss came out and found out how much he made, and the boss cut his commissions. So I think that luck probably plays a little bit in everybody's career.
Just working hard is absolutely not enough. Like, plenty of people just simply are not talented in the ways that society rewards. Like, most people just aren't good singers. They're just not good at doing math. They're just not good at playing football. They're just not good at these things that society, or I don't know, capitalism, if you want to talk about it like that, rewards financially.
When I was younger, I just thought there were people that were more poor than I was. But I know, seeing my friends at different things that had food in the cabinets all the time and had extra clothes and had more than I did, I guess I realized we didn't have as much. But I mean, you see people that are homeless or live in their cars, and I guess I see that as poor. And there was a brief time where we were, a few months that were difficult, that we didn't know where we were going to stay. Probably from when I was born to about 10, we only lived in a couple places. That's when we were a little bit more middle class and had a few more things. But then after that, we probably moved probably a dozen times. I'm not even quite sure, but probably at least a dozen times. My mom had never really worked since she was in college probably, and just then as a restaurant. And I think there wasn't anybody that would hire my dad in that town, so we had to move actually to Indianapolis. And we just lived off one income for a while with 4 people. I remember one Christmas, when that was happening, Christmas came around, and we were at a hotel, and it was probably me and my sister would say the best time of our lives, just because to care about our family so much and have that time. But basically we all wrote each other letters of what we wanted to give them. And it was probably, people probably think that's crazy or stupid, but it was probably the most exciting Christmas I had and the most memorable one, just because we cared about each other so much. And we knew that's all that mattered, is that we had each other.
The family you're born into has an awful lot to do with your success. Your environment and your family are very, very big factors.
A lot of people whose parents didn't make what mine did lived the same lifestyle. And my parents lived it. What I mean is they didn't rise up to my parents' lifestyle. My parents came down to a lower lifestyle, and I didn't know anything of whether they had money or not, because it never seemed like it. It seemed like I was just in a normal household, just like everyone else, socioeconomically wise. But everyone sometimes worries about money, right? What happens if I get really sick? You know, they're older. What happens if I have to go to a nursing home? What do those cost? Thousands of dollars a month. And what do I do for my spouse, right? So what if your spouse needs something at $14 or $10 or $8 or $6,000 a month? How does the other one continue to make it, right? That's a lot of money. So I work with people who are just like me, trying to struggle and be there at 10:30, 11:30 at night, trying to figure it out, going on Saturdays, going on Sundays. You know, if life hits you with something difficult, too bad. Let's see if you can come in and figure it out. And, you know, it was one of those kind of things.
I want to pursue politics. I don't know how to get there. And I think ultimately what will happen is I'll end up going to a trade school. to get a trade, probably become electrician or carpenter.
Having a job is more important than holding out for a potential job. But so once you're actually got a job, then you can start looking for something else if you need to.
If I wouldn't have gotten that job, I doubt I'd left school. But I think everything happens for a reason, and I don't know if I would have economically been in a better state if I would have finished school. But I don't regret anything.
If I could give any advice to anyone, it's when you get out of college, just go and do it all.
I did a lot of things I enjoyed, but I realized that enjoyment wasn't going to give me the health care and provide all the, provide all the things I kind of wanted in life. So I was like, I'm just going to stay with this, and if I see an opportunity, I'll take it. Otherwise, I'm just going to figure it out. I was like, oh, and that's, kind of weird to think about how I just was so cavalier about it, but that's kind of how I thought. I was like, I'll just finish up and go find a job.
One of his neighbors wanted him to go to school, and he was going to pay for him to be a medical doctor. And Dad had all the smarts to do that, but he was about 10 or 15 years younger than his next sibling. And his mother was in Grayson County, Kentucky, and his father had died when he was 2, and she didn't want to see him go to school and go away and leave her behind.
The main issue surrounding college right now is, at least in America, is the shocking amount of cost that is associated with it. Not just with tuition, but also with costs of books and costs of housing, especially if you don't want to live on campus. You will have to probably take out a lot of loans to be able to cover the overall cost of attending college, and that's, in my opinion, just unacceptable.
As I've gotten older, I've found a lot of people out there, and even here at the site, we got a lot of very smart people, but they're going to have to work a lot harder to advance in the group because they don't have the engineering degrees.
People view people that didn't go to college differently, I think. Maybe not listen to your opinion as much because you think maybe you're not as smart, really.
The counselors in high school were not very helpful, and I don't know if it's because of my background and what they thought of me, so they didn't really think I would go to college. And I think they just felt like, I don't know, they really didn't help me. I went in to talk to them once, and they really didn't give me help with looking into scholarships or grants. They just kind of was like, well, maybe you should try a technology school.
I never even thought about like that. I was like, oh, it's just like another thing to do. Like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go get this degree, and like I said, I'll just move on and figure out life later. I never even thought about how to pay for college. Like, I didn't even know people went and got loans for college. That's how silly it was, right? Like, I knew they did. That's not true. But I remember trying to apply for some grant money, and like my parents, like, because of what they made, I couldn't even qualify for that. So it was just like, if I was either going to get a student loan on my own, and that couldn't really happen because of the way the system's set up, that, right? So you have to have the parents sign for that. I could have done that. But my parents were planners, and still are planners in their 70s, but they planned for it, and so they were always told me that they would pay for undergrad.
My parents paid for a little over half of it, and then I paid with the savings for a good chunk of it, and then also had to work through college, especially in the summers full time.
There weren't grants that I knew of at that time, so I paid for it out of my pocket.
I went to WNC, which is Western Nevada College, pretty regularly. The hospital I worked for paid for it, so I actually didn't have to pay for any schooling. It was just go to school, working, and have a baby. I had to give one thing up when Brandon came, and actually I gave 2 things up because I quit work and I quit school.
I went to a local school, IUPUI in Indianapolis, and because I was just married, I had a couple grants, and then I had a couple private loans too. I also applied at IU and Ball State. I know I got into Ball State, And I guess I just didn't want to go away from the person I liked and cared about in my family, so I just stayed local because I could live at home and go to school.
I applied to a lot of schools in Indiana, a lot being 3, and I got into all of them, but I just decided Indiana was the best fit for me. So I went on school visits. I think I went to Ball State, and I went to Purdue and Indiana, and I think I even went to Rose-Hulman and some other smaller schools, but Indiana, just the town and the area just felt right for me, and I had friends going there, and I thought, well, that would be good for me to have, a support system. So yeah, that's why I chose Indiana University.
If you have a passion, then in my mind, so long as that passion has an economic advantage at the end, then it's worth pursuing it. And I don't know, I was thinking like culinary school, right? It's certainly not worth it. There's lots of people that are very good cooks that don't necessarily need to go to school to learn that. So why not spend a few years taking a couple classes here and there until you figure out what you actually enjoy, and then spread out and say, can I get the degree I need here of what I enjoy, or should I look other places for that school that's going to get me the competitive edge?
People don't care about coming into class. I mean, you see it. Most students, can barely keep themselves awake. A lot of the times they're just on their phones, or they're scrolling through social media on the computers if they have them, or phones otherwise. And I don't know how I would be able to motivate those students, but it's clear to me that the teachers don't either.
It's kind of like sports. You're going to kind of get lucky if you're going to make it in that field. And you could work really hard, but if you're really going to make it in television, or you're going to do something like that, sometimes you got to get a little lucky. Better than good.
We still have a problem where schools are woefully underfunded. Like, plenty of schools don't get the equipment they need. Plenty of students aren't able to afford lunches, for example, aren't able to attend classes where the teacher can actually talk to them because class sizes are so big. So while I think that the education system does need to be restructured, I think that pouring money into it will fix the other problem, at least, and will probably drastically help the current problems that we face, especially with class mobility.
Dad was a avid reader, and there was a financial reporter named Sylvia Porter, and he read her column and books very carefully, and ended up amassing a pretty good sum of money, and was a man that I was always very proud of.
I don't think they thought about saving money at that time, but we didn't waste a lot of money. There was me, and I have 2 sisters, so I think they did their best to make our lives nice and had nice things. But I guess I would say, at this time in my life, I would say they weren't very responsible because they didn't have a savings.
My father would go over some of the financial deals that he was working on, like, how he was taking out second loans to pay off credit card debt or car loans. But as far as sitting down and him showing me how to run a checkbook and manage that, he never went over any of that with me.
I honestly think if my parents came into a large portion, they probably wouldn't spend on the money. My dad's a spender too. They both are. Whenever they get money, they spend it. They can't save.
They never talked about money when I was a kid. Probably because they always had good jobs and they always saved, and so they had money. So conversations about money wouldn't be, how are we going to pay bills? It'd be like, well, let's not do that giant project this year. Let's put it off another year and save more money.
They live in nice gentrified neighborhoods. They have 3 meals a day. They have multiple cars for the family, and they're able to pay for college and pay for vacations and all this stuff. So definitely in the upper echelons of society, but not like a millionaire.
I remember a couple of times being asked, what are you going to wear on Sundays if you're wearing such good clothes today? And I really felt badly for some of these kids because many of them had really difficulties in their families. And in this housing project that was owned by the city, there were a lot of them that had experienced a lot of alcoholism and even drugs back in those days of the early 50s.
I think that's one of those where people in general, especially in the government, feel that it's a choice that they've made, so why do we have to support that poor choice?
I drank a lot and partied a lot, smoked a lot of pot.
Went to a friend's house, stayed out, didn't get home till late, would stay that late.
Dated people that they didn't like, stayed out all night, was bad at school. I did have a job. I don't know if I was a typical teenager, but I was definitely a rebellious teenager.
None of my interests really line up with the people around me, which makes me feel like an outcast. But, you know, it's through this understanding of philosophy and politics that I have found myself to be more connected to the people around me. Like, I feel like because I've been able to introspect so deeply into who I am and what my emotions are and what they're like, that I feel like I can empathize with people on a level deeper than what most of my peers might be able to do.
You know, it was hard for me sometimes because of that, you know, small town mentality, they might call it. It was a little difficult for me. I knew that I wasn't going to stay there. I knew that when I grew up there, I loved it, and you felt safe and comfortable. There was great things about it. You developed close relationships with people. But I just also knew as I grew up there, opportunities weren't going to be there. I mean, it was nice. I enjoyed it, you know, but at the same time, I knew that I could never live in a small town for most of my life.
There wasn't anywhere for us to go. We lost the house. Our family didn't have room for us, and my oldest sister actually had just gotten married, so she actually did watch my other sister, and she lived with her. But me and my mom didn't really have anywhere to stay.
So that's where I think the government should be stepping up, and it's not necessarily just the government that's supposed to be taking care of it. It's a democracy, so it's the people that have voted in everybody into the government. It's us changing that mindset to them, saying that it's really up to us to say these are hard passes, that you're not allowed to cut the spending on these programs for the people. It's just, you know, we seem not to care about how much they spend on the military, right? Because we've got that in our minds that you always have to spend money to protect ourselves. Well, why don't we have the same thing when it comes to healthcare and helping our common man in this country?
I had a friend that went to Vietnam. He had amoebic dysentery and malaria, and came home and said, "Honey, I'm home." And his wife said, "You might as well turn around and leave, because I'm going to divorce you and marry someone else."
My dad once told me they got married again so they could file bankruptcy and it would be cheaper. I don't know if that's true or not. I know that they did not share a bed after they got married the second time. My dad slept on the couch.
I think when I was younger, we enjoyed going out and being with friends, and once I was pregnant and had a baby, I think my value was more to be home and more family life, where he liked to go out and do things. And we just were different people too. We argued a lot over little things that didn't really matter, but just different personalities.
You know, we may not have the perfect marriage, but at least we're still together, and we still talk to each other, and we enjoy being around each other.
You have to make compromise. You have to work with your wife or your husband on these things, and you have those conversations, and you try to make the best you can. But my wife and I grew up in very different socioeconomical backgrounds, but way different thoughts on it. Again, I don't know if her parents were savers or not. I don't think they were, but my parents were definitely savers, and like I said, I never struggled, or I don't remember ever struggling. So she grew up not worrying about things like that, where I grew up going, oh no, we have to have things. Like, we have to have X amount of money in the bank, we need to have emergency funds, we need to think about this. And so with my oldest, again, because I was hoping that for me, as he grew up, I try to provide a nice environment for him to live in, more than anything else. And hoping that his father, who was a brilliant guy too, could figure, would share some of that information as well. And maybe it didn't happen. But I also thought my son was really brilliant, so I didn't worry about it as much.
My kids never ended up in prison, right? So I must have raised them right somehow.
I think I did every single thing different than my parents did, to be honest. I can't think of a parenting technique that my parents used on us that I would have felt comfortable using on my own kids. And Chuck is the same way. Mm-hmm. I mean, his parents left him at home alone starting when he was like 4 years old. So we never did that. We didn't ever give them to their grandparents for 2 weeks so we could go off and do something. We liked being parents. Mm-hmm. And I think that shows in kids' happiness. I mean, our daughter's pretty happy. Brandon right now is 18, so it's hard for him. Kind of. Doesn't know what he wants yet.
What would truly make me happy is struggling and hopefully succeeding, but largely just struggling to make other people's lives better.
I think my son is in a crossroads in his life right now where he wants to please his parents, especially his dad, and he's having a tough time wanting to kind of strike out on his own, which I know that he wants to do. He wants to travel before he kind of settles down, and he would like to see a lot of things. And then he also knows that if he doesn't go to college, that his dad's going to be disappointed in him, which I think is true.
I was more worried that if he didn't go to school, how's he ever going to succeed? But then I start looking around at, again, people here, even people that I went to school with that didn't go to college, and none of them are living in their cars down by the river. So, school isn't everything. I think it's a tool to be able to advance easier.
Being able to build a happy life is more important than financial success or making lots of money.
He's so smart. My worry is that he's gonna settle for something less than what he could do.
I always thought, man, I could sell a lot of cars. I like cars. I'm going to get into this business, and then I'm going to find another job that I really want to do, right? So I'll just do this when I'm looking for a job. And so I did that. And I think it's one of those things where I go, man, I really would never want to sell cars for a living. It's not easy. Could you imagine? I mean, think about it. Sitting in a dealership for hours upon hours, waiting on people to come in, or having to call people on cold call. It was not for me. And then if you're trying to be like what I was, which is let me just demonstrate and help you figure out if this is the car for you, that's not really how the dealerships want you to sell. They want you to get the deal done. And then people who go in there are nervous wreck, oh, you're trying to sell me, and I'm going to say no to everything you ask. So it was a hard thing to do, but I learned how to buy a car for myself. And so the 5 or I don't know how long I worked there, but it was months, not years. So I worked there for a few months, and it was valuable.
My first job was in a factory. It was called TTI, and I threaded little tiny wires into little things that we would crimp, little, I don't know, silver tubes or whatever. And I did that, made pretty good money. I think it was $3.75 an hour. It's pretty sweet. Just that job was kind of terrible.
My first job was working for my grandfather as a field hand on a little farm that he had in Elko, Nevada. And for me, that was a lesson on manual labor and how important it is to go to school, because that opens up the doors for better jobs. And not having to do a lot of manual labor.
when I told her that this gal that I worked with, I told her that that it's just so hard to make ends meet. She said, "Sell some of your stocks and bonds." I said, "Doggone it, I didn't think of that."
You always wanted more fashionable clothes as a girl. You wanted, things from the limited or expensive stores. And they're not real expensive, but too expensive for what my parents could afford. And honestly, it was free food. So that was always good because my mom didn't cook a lot. So it was somewhere I could go and eat and have money to do different things. And I sometimes I'd help give my parents money too.
They weren't very stable.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't discipline us or try to make us do anything. They didn't, I don't know, they were easy to kind of just stay away from, so I was able to maybe not rebel, I kind of just did whatever I wanted and they didn't care.
He was one of those parents that always loved his kids unequivocally. There were times where I think he had a choice to be with a friend or with one of his children to go fishing or hunting or go to a park, and he chose his children many times.
My mom started having kids when she was 15. I think when she hit about 30, my older brother was 15, which made me 11, and then my younger brother 9. That's kind of when she went through this second childhood, really. Just kind of rebelled all throughout her 30s. And part of her 40s, honestly. So I don't really think I think she liked it in the beginning, but didn't. My dad enjoyed being a dad, though, our whole lives. He was fine with us as being teenagers. Unfortunately for us, he wasn't around a lot, just because of my parents' marriage. But he was fine.
From the time I was 12 to probably till I was 20, yes, he was away from home and come home maybe once a month, or we'd go visit him.
I don't know if it was ever even offered for us to go live with our dad.
He was in a mental hospital at the time. Because a lot of paperwork didn't get taken care of, and they were very short-staffed, and it wasn't done correctly. So a lot of the money didn't get to where it was supposed to go to get the insurance started. So basically, when you buy insurance, you pay for that insurance. You can pay for monthly, or you can pay for like a year or 6 months. And because they were getting so many people new coming in, the money was just sitting in files and wasn't getting turned into the insurance company that he worked for, the main company. So what happened is someone got in a wreck, and the insurance money hadn't been turned in yet to the main company. And basically they looked at that as stealing the money, embezzling the money. So basically he had to stop working in insurance and had to go to court. And he was okay and moved on, but that's really where we had a very difficult time. My mom wasn't working, and he couldn't get a job for a while, so we had one place for maybe 2-3 years, and then we moved to another apartment complex for 2 or 3 years, and we moved to Louisville for maybe a year. Then we moved back for a couple years, and I think where else, but pretty much in apartments, just different apartment complexes.
One summer, I think we lived 6 different places. One point, we lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with 20 other people. We were living with someone my mom worked with. Her name was Paulette. Paulette's pregnant 15-year-old. And then my older brother was with us then. I think my younger brother went with my dad to Indiana. And then there was just random people living there.
We, lived in a mobile home when I was a child up until I was about 10 years old. Lived in an apartment complex for a couple years. So, it wasn't until I was about 12 or 13 before my parents bought their first house.
No matter what I do, I'm always going to be attached to the way I was developed, or the way I developed when I was born and lived in a middle class society. Like, there's no avoiding that. Like, I can't pretend that I wasn't, born into like a wealthy family.
I think money now becomes security. And so people see money as, if I have enough money, if I can write a check to make a problem go away, that's a good thing, right? I just don't want to be in a situation where my family has to make a difficult decision like sell a home or, food independence or whatever. I would never want to be in that kind of position. So that's what I worry about. I worry about how is it I'm helping everyone else in my family as well.
Proper prior planning prevents poor performance. And it's a guideline that I've often looked at and thought through. And it reminded me of something that my dad used to say that used to get on my nerves as I was growing up. You can get more accomplished and will get more accomplished with your hard work and enthusiasm than the person that has a lot more intelligence or maybe a lot more skill.
I think if you're more wealthy, like me, or like a fraction of this country, absolutely there's opportunities for you to be able to move up the ladder. But I'd say by and large, probably over half this country isn't able to do that. A lot of people are kind of locked into their social class.
I think that's probably our biggest problem in this country is those people don't have much of a voice in our government, and there's really nothing within the government that are like hard passes, right? There are things that you should always be forced to spend money on, and I think supporting your mentally ill is one of them.
I think a lot of people need to be watched more in society, either with group home housing or some kind of housing like that. State hospitals are also severely underfunded. Sometimes there's 3-month waits for psych beds in a hospital, so they're kept in subacute hospitals, and they're kept. So they've had people stay in the ER sometimes up for 10 days waiting for bed placement. So I think we need to fund mental health more. I think it's definitely something that needs more funding. But it's not like fun illness, right? So they have suicide walk. They don't have bipolar walks. They don't have schizophrenia walks. It's just a disease nobody wants to think about.
Working with people that are having handicaps of different sorts, mental, physical, and many times many physical ailments, helps you really to appreciate what you have. Even if you yourself have some limited abilities in some areas of your life, or whether it's walking, or whether it's vision, or whether it's hearing, when you see someone that's in the last days, the last years of their life, and maybe they've gone through years of challenges, you really have to realize and stop and think how blessed you really have been.
I think I will never be satisfied with how much I've done in my life. Like, no matter what even if I solve climate change, for example, or cure cancer, I don't think that will ever be enough for me. I'll always want to help more people, and it's probably a little unhealthy, but I think that, in the end, that's kind of what's driving me, and without that, I don't know if I would be driven to keep going, to get out of bed in the morning. So
my mentality or understanding of life in my 20s versus my 40s is quite a bit different.
Felt panicky whenever I was in a group of people, just kind of social anxiety a little bit. My parents also got divorced a couple of times in that period of time, so therapy was actually an option given to me by them.
Going from poor to doing well you spend a lot of money because you have it and just feel like you need to buy things. And after a while, it's just stuff, and you realize that's just not important long term, and your real goals in life.
Making sure my kids are successful in society and able to move out of my house and contribute in some way to society is one of my measures of success.
I feel like there's still things to teach and help with and guide. And I try to guide, kind of like I was mentioning earlier about work, kind of like letting that person come to it on their own by giving them information and see if they can do it on their own, especially if they're smart, they will. So it's like, I feel like I can still do that. But with her, I'm more relaxed, and I'm just enjoying her being young. And at the same time being really tired, because being 40 and raising a kid is a lot more like when I was raising Austin, it was just easy because, I was 20 and I had all the energy in the world. And now I don't have that energy in the world. But now I think I have more self-assuredness and different things to offer. I don't know if I would do anything. I definitely could say this. I won't love them any differently. I love them the same.
I remember visiting with a 94-year-old aunt many years ago, and I said, "Aunt Viola, what's the hardest thing about being 94 years old? You seem to be very happy." And she said, "Daryl, I'll tell you, there's nobody around that I can enjoy and talk to about the good old days. All my friends and my 3 sisters, one of whom was my mother, all my friends and my farmer husbands, and have all passed away." And she said, "I'm living with my daughter and son-in-law, but they have the challenges of their own children, and I'm living with other people, but I'm very lonely." And it's kind of struck a chord that just because you're around a lot of people or other people does not necessarily mean that you can feel like you're really fitting in. And sometimes as we age, I've seen many people feel like they're very unproductive and, I'll use the word, useless. And that is so sad that anyone ever feels that way.
Not having like a clear goal or like a clear drive of what I want to do with my whole life just scares me, because there's always that fear that I might never figure out what I want to do, or I might not do it in time, and then I might end up getting stuck and becoming, one of these people who, only ends up becoming like a regional supervisor.
As a college kid, you don't care. You're just like, yeah, I'm going to satisfy something to get my degree, right? You got to do this. And so I realized that small town television wasn't going to be anything I wanted to get to. Now, the people I saw make money. And so was money the important thing? I came from a well-to-do family, but that wasn't as important as I just didn't see a future in it. But the salespeople were the only people I saw making any money at it, and I was like, no, I don't want to do that.
And that's probably the other big motivator, is that I'm paid well for what I do. If I was making half of that, I would still want to be within this group, but I wouldn't want to be doing this specific job.
Before we moved to Minnesota, I worked on the care teams, and I worked with 200 severely mentally ill population. And that job, I think, was the most rewarding job I've ever had. And I liked that job. It was also the most difficult job that I've ever had, just because of the sadness of people because most of these people were diagnosed with schizophrenia, and it was literally like one step away from state hospital. Most of them were in.
Everything has been products and services that I've sold, but doing caregiving for people who had handicaps of one sort or another was really eye-opening, and they're almost like a part of your family. You really feel it.
Ultimately there really is only one way to help people on a large scale, and that is to wield power to do it. I think it's inevitable that I will hurt some people to help other people, but the hope of mine is that I will make the right decisions at the right time to be able to help more people than I hurt.
That one, though, is a little more difficult because you can't prevent parents from having as many children as they want. So after a while, it's not necessarily the child's fault that he's in a family of 10 or 15 kids, but at the same time, why does the government have to keep providing housing for a couple that seems to want to procreate endlessly, right?
It's just difficult being a single mom. I had to have a car to pick him up because he was in Indianapolis and I was in Kokomo. So that was difficult. So I had to pay for things that were expensive, and it's just hard.
I never worried about money but I just always knew in the back of my head, yeah, this isn't my stopping point. This is just me figuring out until I get to where I am at, and I don't know where that's going to be just yet. And having parents with money kind of helps, right? And they can help you along the way. But I never wanted to ask for a lot of help. They probably gave it knowing I needed it from time to time. Like, hey, we got some new shoes, or hey, we got you this. But never would ask for it because, again, that goes back to that whole I don't want to seem like a failure thing. I want to figure this out on my own.
A lot of where people end up in life is purely through chance. A lot of your economic standing is by the luck of where you were born, and not really where you worked yourself towards being. And especially as someone who came from a very wealthy family, I guess you could say I have a little bit of guilt as someone who got very lucky. And because of that, I feel like it's sort of my duty to try to help people who didn't get what I got in the beginning.
As my faith would tell me, that I'm a little selfish if I'm not doing something for someone else.
Not knowing where we're going to live all the time, parents fighting, getting divorced, parents losing their jobs. Just, it was not like, they were happy. We definitely had happy times. Mm-hmm. It wasn't all horrible, but it was tough. It was a tough childhood.
I think it also made me a very much stronger person. I probably grew up faster than most of my friends that I knew in school. And if we would have had more money, that would have probably been different. I wouldn't have been as independent as I probably was. Learning at a young age that you've got to take care of yourself, and I don't think that would have happened if we would have had money.
My family never dealt with things like that, so I get more nervous about those things as an adult. But if I had always dealt with that, and I have family members now who've always dealt with that when they were children, and they don't worry about it as much. They're like, yeah, these things happen. We go through these patterns, or we go through these times. I probably would deal with times where I have to pay for a $4,000 bill or a $3,000 medical bill or car payment, or not a car payment, but a car repair. And I'm like, man, that really hit us financially. I probably wouldn't worry about that as much because the fact that I had it was great, right? And so I think I'd probably be a little bit more relaxed about certain things. In the small town I grew up with, I don't think it'd have been an issue. I don't think people... Again, because there wasn't a lot of wealthy people, I don't think I would have been judged, or I wouldn't have thought about being judged. So I don't know, though. That's a good question. I'd have to... I don't know. I think it still would have been pretty... It would have been a pretty similar life. I didn't grow up thinking about money, so I don't think it really would have changed my childhood a whole lot.
A lot of why I want to go out and experience the world is because I know that I live like a very sheltered life, and I don't actually get a very... large perspective of what the world is actually like, and I want to experience that. I kind of want to get out of that sheltered life, and so like I'm kind of running away from the sheltering, I guess, but I would say that like I'll never be able to escape privilege, because that's just kind of like who I am because of the way I was developed.
It just added so much to life to be able to experience other countries and other cultures. And I always thought that someday, as the world gets smaller, it's going to be pretty commonplace for my children and grandchildren to be traveling to other countries.
You definitely want them to have a better life than what you did, I guess, or the same even, really.
I want to make sure that they're okay and that they don't have situations that I ever went through, where they don't have money or they can't take care of themselves, or in so much debt that it just stresses them out.
I don't think I've ever done that with either one of my kids, sat them down and shown them how to manage their money. But at the same time, they both have checking accounts and they've never overdrawn on them. So I kind of feel like they know how to keep within their means without me having to explain it to them.
I would definitely have that conversation with Sophia. And maybe I feel like I'm more free to have that conversation because she's my child, and I don't think my wife would get in the way of that conversation. Where beforehand I was always, that's kind of weird. I guess I kind of always a little worried about, overstepping my role as a stepfather versus a father. Like as a father, I don't think that ever. As a stepfather, I always thought I'll be the loving, caring person who provides a good environment, as opposed to being the one who has to. Well, I'll teach by example, but I won't have to necessarily sit down and have these difficult conversations because. Yeah, I'm not sure that's what, would have been good for my relationship.
I think our legacy is our kids and grandkids and kind of passing down our values and things like that. So I felt like I had to take them to church. I also was baptized in Indiana. Wasn't kind of like any kind of spiritual quest I was on. Oh, I need to get baptized so I can go to heaven, because I think it's a little silly, honestly. It's because somebody dunks your head in some water. I mean, that's it, and then you go to heaven. Seems silly.
My mother had a stroke at 85 and was paralyzed, and you could tell by her eyes that she kind of understood the conversation pretty well, but she didn't have any movement, and spent the last 3 years of her life in a nursing home. But being a person of faith, I felt certain that she was going to heaven because she was one of the most religious and unselfish people I've ever known. But it probably prepared me for spending time with my wife, who was seriously handicapped at the last of her life and passed away.
I think that's kind of the part of the fun of life, is discovering who you really are. And I don't think it's ever possible to fully know. If it was, then I think life would probably be pretty boring.
Their first night ever with my hair right away. I found down there, and I easy, and on